Tonight, the moon comes closer to the Earth than it has been in months. I want you to actually picture that for a moment, not as a poetic image, but as something real, something physical happening above you tonight, whether you notice it or not. The moon on its elliptical path around the Earth, reaching one of the closest points it reaches all year. At the exact same moment it disappears from view entirely, the exact moment of the new moon. This is what is called a supermoon. And tonight, June 14th, it coincides with the new moon in Gemini, the sign of communication, of the mind, of new ways of thinking and speaking and understanding. When these two things happen together, a supermoon and a new moon, the effect is not simply doubled. It is something closer to amplified. Whatever a new moon would normally do in terms of opening a new cycle, tonight's new moon does with more force, more reach, more impact, because of how close the moon is to us while it happens. And tonight, God is asking something specific of you. He is asking you to be alone. I know that might sound like an unusual request, especially if being alone is not something that comes naturally to you, or if your life right now is full, busy, surrounded by people, with very little space carved out for solitude. I want to explain why tonight, specifically, this request matters, because I do not think it is arbitrary, and I do not think it is something you want to brush past without understanding. Here is what I mean by destiny, because I want to be precise about this, and I do not want it to sound like an empty, grand word that does not actually mean anything specific. Destiny, in the sense I mean it here, is not some fixed, unchangeable script that was written before you were born, that you are simply walking through without any influence over it. That is not what I am describing. What I mean by destiny is closer to this. The trajectory your life is currently on, the direction it has been moving in based on everything that has shaped it so far, everything you have done, everything that has happened to you, every choice, every habit, every belief, every relationship, all of it combined pointing in a certain direction. That trajectory is not fixed. It can shift. But it does not shift easily, and it does not shift often. Most days, most weeks, most months, the trajectory simply continues because nothing happens that is significant enough to bend it in a different direction. Tonight is different. Tonight, with the supermoon amplifying the new moon's energy of new beginnings, the trajectory your life has been on has an unusual amount of flexibility to it. Not infinite flexibility. Not a magic wand that can make your life become anything at all overnight, but more flexibility than an ordinary night carries. A window where the direction can shift more easily than usual based on what happens tonight. This is what I mean by rewrite your destiny, not erasing everything and starting from nothing, but shifting the trajectory, even slightly, in a way that over time compounds into something quite different from where the unshifted trajectory would have led. Now, why does this require you to be alone? I want to walk through this carefully because I think understanding the why is what is going to make the instruction itself, stay alone tonight, feel meaningful rather than arbitrary. When you are around other people, even people you love, even people who mean you no harm, a certain amount of your attention is always directed outward. You are tracking their moods, responding to their needs, participating in conversations, adjusting yourself even in small ways to the social context you are in. This is normal. It is part of being around other people. But it also means that a portion of your attention, your awareness, your inner life is occupied by something other than yourself. Tonight, with the trajectory of your life unusually open to shifting, what shifts it is not an external event, not something someone else does or says. What shifts it is something internal. Something that happens within you, in your own awareness, in the quiet space where you are not performing, not responding, not adjusting to anyone else, simply being present with yourself and with God. If that internal space is occupied even partially by the ordinary demands of being around other people, the shift that tonight makes available has less room to actually happen. Not because being around people is wrong, but because the specific kind of shift tonight offers requires a kind of internal space that being around people, even pleasantly, tends to fill up. This is why God is asking you to be alone tonight, not because solitude itself is holy or because being around people is somehow against what tonight represents. but because the shift tonight offers needs room, internal room, and solitude is what creates that room. I want to address something practically, because I know for some of you, being completely alone tonight might not be realistic. You might have family obligations, people who live with you, responsibilities that cannot simply be set aside for an evening. If complete solitude is not possible for you tonight, I want you to know that this does not mean tonight's opportunity is closed to you. What matters most is not the complete absence of other people from your physical space. What matters is finding even a small window, even 15 or 20 minutes, where you can be quiet, where you can turn your attention inward, where the ordinary demands of being around others can be set down, even briefly. This could be early in the morning before anyone else is awake. It could be late at night after everyone else has gone to sleep. It could be a few minutes in a room by yourself with the door closed, even if there are people elsewhere in the house. The point is not the size of the solitude. The point is the quality of it, the quality of turning inward, even for a short time on this specific night. Now I want to talk about what to actually do during this time, because being alone on its own does not automatically produce a shift. What you do with the aloneness matters. The first thing I want to invite you to do is this: spend some time, even just a few minutes, in genuine quiet. Not quiet with a podcast playing in the background, not quiet with your phone nearby and your attention partially on it. Genuine quiet, no input, no words, no sounds, no screens. I know this can feel uncomfortable, especially if you are used to having some kind of background noise or stimulation most of the time. The discomfort of genuine quiet, especially at first, often comes from the fact that in genuine quiet, thoughts and feelings that have been sitting underneath everything else start to surface. Things you have not had space to feel because there has always been something occupying the space where feeling them would happen. Tonight, I want you to let this happen, rather than reaching for something to fill the quiet the moment it starts to feel uncomfortable. If thoughts surface, let them surface. If feelings arise, let them arise. You do not need to do anything with them necessarily. Just let the quiet be quiet, and let whatever comes up in that quiet be present, without rushing to manage it or distract from it. The second thing I want to invite you to do is this. Once you have spent some time in quiet, speak to God about where your life is currently heading. This does not need to be a long, formal prayer. It can be simple, even conversational. Tell God in your own words what direction your life feels like it has been going. Not just the surface-level things, although those matter too, but the deeper trajectory, the pattern, the thing that, if nothing changed, you would expect to keep experiencing, keep becoming, keep moving toward. This is not about complaining necessarily. Although if there is something about the current trajectory that troubles you, it is okay to say so. It is more about naming, honestly, where things currently seem to be heading. Sometimes simply naming this out loud or in your own mind, in the presence of God, in the quiet on a night like tonight, is itself part of what creates the opening for the trajectory to shift. The third thing I want to invite you to do is this. After naming where things have been heading, ask God specifically if there is a different direction He wants to begin opening for you. I want to be careful here because I do not want this to sound like a wish list, like asking for a list of things you want and expecting them to simply appear. That is not what I mean. What I mean is something more like this. After naming the current trajectory, simply ask with openness, with genuine curiosity rather than demand, whether there is something different that God wants to begin tonight in terms of direction. You might not get a clear answer immediately. You might not get any answer at all in the sense of words or a feeling of certainty. That is okay. The asking itself on a night like tonight is part of what matters. You are not asking into emptiness. You are asking on a night when the trajectory has unusual room to shift, and the asking itself is part of what positions you to receive whatever shift is coming, even if you cannot perceive it directly tonight. I want to talk now about something specific to the Gemini energy of tonight's new moon, because I think it adds an important dimension to all of this. Gemini governs the mind, thoughts, the internal narration that runs constantly, mostly below the level of conscious awareness, shaping how we interpret everything that happens to us. A new moon in Gemini, especially one amplified by a supermoon, is particularly connected to this internal narration, to the stories we tell ourselves, the beliefs we carry about what is possible, about what we deserve, about what our lives are likely to become. Often when people think about destiny, about the trajectory of their life, they think about external circumstances, where they live, what they do for work, who is in their life. But underneath all of these external things is something more fundamental, the internal story, the narrative you carry, mostly unconsciously, about who you are and what your life is. This internal story shapes the external trajectory more than most people realize. Not in some magical, simply think positive and everything will be fine way, but in the much more grounded sense that the internal story shapes what you notice, what you pursue, what you allow yourself to consider possible, what you give up on and what you keep trying for. Tonight, with this Gemini supermoon, the internal story has an unusual amount of room to shift. This is part of why the solitude matters so much. The internal story is, by definition, internal. It exists in the quiet space of your own mind, the space that being around other people tends to fill with external input. Tonight, in the quiet with that space open, the internal story has room to be noticed, examined, and, if needed, begin to shift. Now I want to talk about what this internal story actually looks like, because I think it can be hard to notice something that has been running in the background for so long that it has become invisible. The way a hum in a room becomes inaudible once you have been in the room long enough. Here is one way to find it. Think about how you tend to talk about your own future, even just in your own head, even just in passing thoughts. When you imagine where things are likely headed, what tone does that imagining usually carry? Is it hopeful, expectant, open? Or is it cautious, bracing, already prepared for things to not quite work out the way you would want? Most people, if they are honest, find that their internal narration about their own future carries at least some version of the second tone, the cautious, bracing one. This is not necessarily because their lives have been uniquely difficult. It is simply how internal stories tend to develop over time through the accumulation of disappointments, both large and small, each one adding a small amount of caution to how the future gets imagined, until the caution becomes the default setting, the lens through which the future is automatically viewed, without anyone consciously choosing it. Tonight I want you to notice this lens if you can, not to judge it, not to feel bad about it, simply to notice it. Notice how you tend to imagine what is coming. Notice the tone, the bracing, the caution if it is there. And then in the quiet with God, I want you to ask a simple question. Is this the lens I want to keep looking through? Not as a demand for it to instantly change, but as an honest question asked in the quiet, on a night when the trajectory has room to shift. I want to say something now about what shifting this internal lens actually involves, because I do not want this to sound like something that happens through sheer willpower, through simply deciding to think more positively and then doing it. The internal lens, the bracing, cautious way of imagining the future, did not form through a single decision, and it will not dissolve through a single decision either. What tonight offers is not an instant transformation of this lens into its opposite. What tonight offers is something more like a crack, a small opening in a lens that has otherwise been quite solid. Think of it like this. If you have been looking at the world through a slightly tinted window for a long time, the tint becomes normal. You stop noticing it is there. You assume the slightly muted colors you see are simply how things look. Tonight is not about suddenly replacing the entire window. It is more like a small section of the tint becoming, briefly, untinted, just for a moment, just enough to see briefly what things look like without that particular shade over them. That brief glimpse, even if it does not last, even if the tint returns afterward, matters. Because once you have seen, even briefly, what something looks like without the tint, you know it is possible to see it that way. The tint is no longer simply how things are. It becomes instead something you know is there, something you can notice, something that over time, with repeated brief glimpses, can gradually become less solid than it once was. Tonight, in the quiet, ask God for this kind of glimpse, not a permanent transformation necessarily, though that is not impossible either, but a glimpse. A moment of seeing your future, even briefly, without the usual tint of caution and bracing. A moment of imagining what is coming with something closer to hope, closer to expectation, closer to openness, even if that feels unfamiliar, even if it feels like trying on a way of seeing that does not quite fit yet. I want to talk now about something that might happen during your time alone tonight, something I want you to be prepared for because it can be confusing if you do not know what it is. Sometimes when people create space for quiet, for genuine solitude, especially on a night like tonight with this much energy available for shifting, what surfaces first is not hope, and it is not a glimpse of a different future. What surfaces first is grief. Grief about the current trajectory. Grief about disappointments that have accumulated. Grief about time that feels like it has been spent in a direction that, looking at it honestly, has not led where you hoped it would. Grief sometimes simply about how tired you are, how long you have been carrying things, how much effort has gone into getting to where you currently are. If this happens to you tonight, I do not want you to see it as a failure or as evidence that the quiet did not work or that you are doing this wrong. Grief surfacing in genuine quiet is often exactly what needs to happen before anything else can. The internal lens I described earlier, the tint of caution and bracing, often has grief underneath it. Grief that has not had space to be fully felt, grief that has instead been managed, pushed down, worked around so that life could continue functioning. Tonight in the quiet, if grief surfaces, let it. Cry if you need to cry, feel whatever needs to be felt. This is not a detour from what tonight offers. It is often part of the path to it. The glimpse of a different future, the crack in the tinted window, often becomes more accessible after grief about the current view has had room to be felt, rather than before. I want to say something now about a specific kind of person who might be reading this. Someone who has been so busy for so long that the idea of sitting in quiet, even for a few minutes with nothing to do and nothing to manage, feels almost unbearable. Not because solitude itself is frightening, but because the busyness has become, in a sense, protective. It keeps things moving, keeps things distracted, keeps the underlying grief and the underlying lens from becoming too visible. If this is you, I want to say something gently. The busyness has served a purpose. It has likely helped you get through things that needed to be gotten through. I am not suggesting that the busyness was wrong or that you should feel bad about having needed it. But tonight, just for a short window, even just 10 minutes, I want to invite you to set the busyness down, not permanently, just for tonight, just for this window. If it feels unbearable, even for 10 minutes, that itself is information. It tells you something about how full the internal space has been, how little room there has been for the kind of quiet that tonight offers. 10 minutes, even if they feel hard, even if they feel like the longest 10 minutes of your week, are still just 10 minutes. And what tonight offers does not require more than that to begin. A small crack in the window is still a crack. Now I want to talk about what happens after tonight, because I do not want this message to leave you with the impression that everything needs to happen completely in this one night or else it does not count. What tonight offers is an opening, a window where the trajectory has more room to shift than usual. What you do tonight, the quiet, the conversation with God, the glimpse of a different future, the grief if it surfaces, all of this is the beginning of something, not the whole of it. In the days and weeks that follow, the shift that begins tonight, if it begins at all, will likely continue in smaller ways. A thought here, a moment there, a small choice that on an ordinary day you might have made differently, but that because of what began tonight you make slightly differently instead. These small moments accumulating are how a shifted trajectory actually becomes a different trajectory over time. So tonight is not a one-time event with no follow-up required. It is more like a seed moment, a beginning that needs the days and weeks afterward to actually grow into something. What you do tonight matters, but what matters just as much is staying aware in the days afterward of the small moments where the shift that began tonight has room to continue. I want to close with something about the supermoon itself, something I think ties everything together. A supermoon is physically simply the moon being closer to Earth than usual. Nothing about the moon itself has changed. It is the same moon it always is. What has changed is its position, its proximity, and because of that proximity, its effect, its pull is stronger than usual. I think this is a useful way to think about what tonight offers in terms of your own life. Nothing about you has fundamentally changed overnight into something different. You are the same person you were yesterday, with the same history, the same patterns, the same internal lens that has been forming for a long time. What is different tonight is something more like proximity. A closeness, an availability, an openness that does not change what you are but changes what is accessible, what has room to move, what can be touched more easily than it usually can be. Use tonight's closeness, be alone even if only briefly. Sit in genuine quiet, speak honestly with God about where things have been heading. Ask if there is a different direction available. Let grief surface if it needs to. And then in the days and weeks that follow, stay aware of the small moments where what began tonight has room to continue. Your destiny, the trajectory of your life, is not fixed. Tonight it has more room to shift than usual. Use the room. I want to add something more, something about a specific kind of question that often comes up around moments like this, something I think deserves a direct answer. The question is this: if tonight is so significant, if the trajectory has this much room to shift, why does it feel so ordinary? Why does tonight not feel different from any other night, at least on the surface? I want to address this directly because I think the gap between how significant something is described as being and how ordinary it actually feels in the moment can sometimes create doubt, a kind of, well, if this were really true, would it not feel like something is happening? Here is what I would say. The significance of tonight is not primarily about how it feels, in the sense of an intense, dramatic, unmistakable sensation. The significance is about what is available, what has room to happen, not what is guaranteed to happen regardless of anything you do. Think of it like this. If someone told you that a particular door which is normally locked is unlocked tonight, that fact would be true and significant whether or not you ever walked through the door and whether or not walking through it felt like anything special. The door being unlocked is the fact. What you do with the unlocked door, whether you notice it, whether you walk through it, whether anything dramatic happens as a result, is a separate matter. Tonight is like the door being unlocked. The fact of it, the trajectory having more room to shift than usual, is true regardless of how the evening feels to you, regardless of whether you experience some kind of intense, unmistakable sensation of significance. What matters is what you do with the unlocked door, not whether the door itself announces its unlocked status with fanfare. So if tonight feels ordinary, even after everything I have described, I do not want you to take that as evidence that nothing significant is available. The door is unlocked, whether or not it feels like it. What you do with that, the quiet, the conversation with God, the glimpse of a different future, is what determines whether the unlocked door gets walked through or simply remains unlocked without anyone noticing. I want to talk now about something specific to those of you who might find during your time alone tonight that nothing in particular seems to happen. No grief surfaces. No glimpse of a different future arrives. The quiet just feels like quiet without anything notable occurring within it. If this is your experience tonight, I do not want you to feel discouraged or to feel like you did something wrong or like tonight passed you by without anything happening. Sometimes what tonight offers is not a single, identifiable moment, a glimpse, a piece of grief, a clear sense of a different direction. Sometimes what tonight offers is simply the quiet itself, the having shown up, the having created the space, even if nothing in particular seemed to fill that space while you were in it. This kind of quiet, even without an identifiable moment within it, still matters. It is still part of using the room that tonight offers. The shift that tonight makes available does not always happen instantly within the window of the quiet itself. Sometimes the quiet is more like preparation, a kind of clearing that makes room for something to happen later in the days that follow, even if nothing seemed to happen during the quiet itself. So if tonight for you simply feels like quiet without anything more specific occurring within it, that is okay. You still showed up. You still created the space. And the days that follow are still part of what tonight opens, even if tonight itself, experienced from the inside, felt uneventful. I want to say something now about the relationship between tonight and tomorrow, because I think this matters. Tomorrow is an ordinary day. in the sense that it does not carry the same astronomical significance that tonight does. The supermoon will have passed. The exact moment of the new moon will be behind you. In terms of the specific astrological configuration, tomorrow is simply tomorrow. But I do not want you to think of tomorrow as separate from tonight, as though tonight's opportunity closes completely once the night ends, and tomorrow starts fresh with no connection to what came before. What tonight opens, the room for the trajectory to shift, does not close instantly at midnight. It is more like tonight is the moment the door becomes unlocked, and the days that follow are the period during which the door remains, at least somewhat, more open than it was before tonight. The opening is strongest tonight, but it does not vanish the moment tonight ends. This means that if, for whatever reason, tonight does not go the way you might have hoped, if you cannot find the solitude you wanted, if the quiet does not produce what you were hoping it would, tomorrow and the days after are not entirely closed to you. The door remains somewhat more open than usual for a little while. If tonight does not work out as planned, there is still some room in the days immediately following to do some version of what I have described, even if it is not exactly tonight. I say this not to reduce the importance of tonight, but to relieve some of the pressure that might otherwise attach to it. Tonight is the peak of the opening, but it is not the entirety of it. I want to close finally with something about what all of this is ultimately for. Everything I have described tonight, the solitude, the quiet, the conversation with God, the glimpse of a different future, the grief if it surfaces, all of it is in service of one thing. Not a specific outcome, not a specific change in your circumstances, but something more foundational than that. A shift, even a small one, in the relationship between you and the direction your life has been heading. For many people, the relationship to their own future is one of passivity. The future is something that happens, that arrives, that unfolds according to its own logic, largely independent of anything the person does in the present moment, beyond the obvious practical things, going to work, paying bills, maintaining relationships. Tonight offers something different, not a replacement for the practical things, but an addition to them. A reminder through the specific opportunity that tonight represents that the trajectory of your life is not simply something that happens to you, that there is a relationship between your interior, your awareness, your conversation with God, and the direction things move in, even if that relationship is not always direct, not always immediate, not always easy to trace. Tonight, however you experience it, whatever happens or does not happen during your time alone, is an opportunity to remember this. To remember that you are not simply a passenger in your own life, even during long seasons when it might feel that way. To remember that the quiet, the solitude, the conversation with God are not separate from the trajectory of your life, but are in fact part of how that trajectory gets shaped, even when the shaping is subtle, even when it takes time to become visible. Be alone tonight, even briefly. Sit in the quiet, speak honestly with God, and remember whatever else happens that you are not simply watching your life happen to you. You are part of how it unfolds. Write REWRITTEN in the comments if you feel this tonight. I read every comment. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because what begins tonight continues over the coming days, and you are going to want to know what to watch for.